But sometimes the art that we see, even the best classic Renaissance art of this event, doesn't really help our cause. So typically you'll see pictures like this, right? You've got the ark there, and the water looks good, and the boat looks big enough. But then I got like elephants and giraffes kind of hanging over the edge like tourists, Hey, look at all that water. And even some of the best artwork on this, it doesn't help our cause. It makes us look like this is really what happened. Whatever happened, I don't know, but maybe I don't think it could probably look like this. I could be wrong. It might have looked like this, but maybe not. But why do we always draw like we're narrating some kid's book, right? Well, it turns out that there are a number of ancient stories about a flood across the globe. Nearly every civilization that's ever lived has got some narrative from the ancient past involving a flood. Did you know that? There are over 200 that we've collected so far, ancient accounts about a flood that occurred in the ancient past. And if you look at where they are located on the map, it's pretty interesting. Of course, you'd expect to see some around the Mediterranean, right? Because let's face it, Moses' account comes from there. So let's take a look at that area of the world. It turns out, though, that Moses' account's not the only one. There are ancient accounts in the area of Egypt, Persia, Turkey, Middle East. There are many ancient accounts of a flood. And if you go into Europe and look a little closer at some of the ancient stories from European cultures in Scandinavia, in the Netherlands, in Germany, in Belgium, in Spain, in Italy, you will find other versions of a flood. And if you go out all the way into China and the areas of Siberia, you'll find that there are also accounts in Thailand, India, of an ancient catastrophic flood. Or if you move down into Australia, that's kind of far away, don't you think? But there are accounts here of ancient floods in many regions in Australia and in New Zealand, and even in the Pacific Islands. If you go into areas around Tahiti, Fiji, Hawaii, you will see a number of ancient accounts of floods even in the South Pacific. How about in our continent, in the area of Alaska or the Americas? You'll see throughout Canada, throughout regions of America in which there are tribal Indian stories that still survive. You'll see them in the area of Washington State, in the area of Tennessee, Georgia. You will see a number of these ancient accounts of a global flood. And of course, Central America, similar in the area of Guatemala, Nicaragua, and throughout the entire area in South America, all the way to the southern tip of Argentina, you will find accounts of an ancient global flood. Now, to be fair, years ago when I first started looking at this, I read through all these accounts, and some of them are kind of dry, okay? And they really don't all contain every element of the flood that Moses contains in his story with Noah. They just don't. But there are some striking similarities. Let's just take a look at where they are located. This is the density in where they are located. Sometimes you wonder why they're not everywhere. Why are there some regions that seem to be empty? And it's simply because if the culture in that region does not develop language and writing capacities quickly, or there isn't the kind of civilization density in certain regions, you don't see the stories. But anywhere in which you see people grouping and civilization rising, you're going to find a flood story. Isn't that interesting? And looking at the flood stories you find certain characteristics, certain features are repeated. So for example, in these stories, 88% contain the story of a favored family who was warned in advance, in 66% of these, of a universal flood. Now when I say universal, I don't mean the entire universe was filled with water. I mean universally catastrophic. Now, sometimes people, even Christians, will divide on whether they think the flood was global or local. And if it's local, they would still agree it's a universally catastrophic flood. It's just maybe not the entire earth. That's an argument for a different day. I'm not sure where some of you land on that issue. But I'm talking about the entire breadth of stories from antiquity. The idea that a catastrophic flood that kills everything is in 95% of them. The survivors in 70% use a boat, and they save animals in 67%, and in 57%, they end up on top of a mountain. Look at the story. If I didn't tell you what that story was, but just kind of gave you these details, what would you think I was describing? You'd think I was describing Noah. And it turns out that's a very similar features. There are some similar features in all of these stories. And if we needed any more proof that maybe there was some kind of an event, some kind of a flood event, a lot of geologists, and Christian and otherwise, have started looking at what would you expect if there was a flood event? The stones speak, not like this, but they speak like this. If you had a global flood event, you would have, even if it's a major flood event that's not global, you're going to see features of the ground as the water rises, stratify, it ruins certain features, creates certain levels that then when the earth moves and mountains are formed, these levels would be available to us to see afterwards. This is what we would expect if this was a global flood, and it turns out that we do see features like this all around the globe. So I think there's probably some good reason, if I'm making a bet here, I'm betting there was some kind of flood event in the ancient past. But the question becomes, how do I know it's the version that Moses is recording? Why should I trust Moses' version, especially if there are other ancient versions out there?